Hello and welcome to Credit Versio's Q&A Wednesday live for March 16th. I'm your host, David Michalek, and every week at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, we come together live on Facebook and YouTube to talk about credit. And as a consumer credit expert with nearly a decade of experience, I've conducted over 10,000 one-on-one credit coaching sessions, and I'm very much looking forward to helping you understand and improve your credit. Joining us today again is America's #1 credit expert. He has 30 years of experience in the credit industry, including years spent at both FICO and Equifax. In fact, he's one of the very few credit experts that actually come from inside the credit industry. So let's welcome my friend John Ulzheimer. Here he is, fresh from vacation, barely made it.
That's right. Fresh from, is there such a thing as fresh from vacation? I think I need a vacation for my vacation. I'm actually really glad to get back to work. I get very stressed out when I know that things are kind of piling up and not getting done.
Yeah, I had this argument for many years. Like I never took a real vacation until I was probably in my early 40s. And that's because I would just freak out. Like I can't be, of course I owned my own businesses at the time. And me leaving work for too long, just like you do, being gone from work too long is like, what am I missing? It's just too hard to get myself out of the work mode. But I'm getting a little bit better at it. So
yeah,
so John,
I'm getting to the point. I don't. I'm self-employed, so I don't have vacation. Self-employed people just have another day. Whether you work that day or not is your choice.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's funny. Just for those watching, a few hours ago, I guess it was probably maybe early in the day when I got in. I sent you an email. I said, hey, because that's just normal routine for me. I'll email John and say, hey, looking forward to today's live. Hey, I think this is what I want to talk about today. And then John usually responds right back, yeah, that sounds great. And then it's off to the races. And then today, like a couple hours later, John emails me. He's like, hey, you know what? I got to get on a plane. Then I got to head back home. I'm like, oh shoot, that's not going to happen today. I thought for sure it wasn't going to work. Okay, but I'm glad you're here, John, and we've got a handful of people watching, people joining. So, one of the things, in fact, you did this video recently, and I thought it was such a great video that why not do a repeat where you talked about the difference between bad credit and having no credit at all, and how that's looked at, and does it really mean the same thing, and what can people do? I thought it was a great topic, considering that a lot of people in Credit Versio are here to do some repair, maybe try to rebuild. Some people don't have any good credit at all. But let's go back a little bit further and let's go to like having no credit versus bad credit.
Yeah. So look, unlike a social security number, which when you're born, your parents, I guess, apply for and get a social security number for you. There is no similar process for a credit report. In other words, the credit bureaus don't know that you were born. Your parents don't call the credit bureaus or some other location or company and ask them to create a kind of a blank page credit report, if you will. None of that stuff happens. And so we all enter the world of consumer finance and kind of the credit life cycle arc the exact same place, which is with nothing. And so that's no credit. And that's what the CFPB commonly refers to as a credit invisible. It's someone who has either no credit report at all, or they have a credit report that is what's called a thin file. They have such a thin credit report that really the information that is there is not generally relied upon heavily by lenders because there's just not enough of it to tell a story about a consumer. So we all start with no credit, and I always talk to people about building credit for the first time is very different than rebuilding credit, because you can only build credit for the first time once, right? It's like your first date, your first job, the first time you did whatever. There's only one time you can do that the first time. So that kind of underscores the importance of understanding how important it is to kind of get out of the gate strong, and because no one teaches this stuff at any level of academia, right? I mean, you may have like the onesies and twosies, but it's not like math or science or history or anything like that, that students are taught in high school. There is no consumer credit course that's taught, and so you're almost thrown to the wolves to some extent when you apply for credit the first time, because there's no driver's ed for credit. And getting
Yeah.
it wrong, as you know, and everybody who's watching knows, getting it wrong in this industry is a 7 to 10 year penalty.
Hmm.
So it kind of underscores the importance of understanding that no credit isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that we all kind of go through. It's kind of the rite of passage, and to establish credit for the first time properly, and then understanding that you have two paths you can take. You can take the path of proper credit management, and then you don't need to ever worry about bad credit, and what does bad credit mean, and what does elevated credit risk mean, and what does negative credit worthiness mean. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It's just kind of an interesting topic that you'll never
Yeah.
have to concern yourself with. Or you can go down that road, and unfortunately, that's generally why people, go to credit repair, or attempt to get information on their credit reports corrected or removed, is because they find themselves in this rebuilding mode. And I just read somewhere today that the Fed is going to increase interest rates. So,
Yeah.
and even though they do, you can still get a mortgage for, if you look at like the mortgage interest rates over the last 40 years, we've
Hmm.
been kind of down at the we've been kind of bouncing off the bottom for a really, really
Yeah.
long time. I mean, certainly as long as I've ever been buying houses. So, even now that interest rates are going up, the importance of having a good credit score is still, it doesn't diminish one iota. So
Yeah.
I think that's really if you needed anybody to sit here and be the cheerleader on why it's important to have good credit, I don't think you did, but certainly that's something that I would do.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we got a bunch of people joining us. Dale
I
is
see that.
back.
That's great.
And what? Welcome. Timothy, thank you for being here. Derek Hayes. Seen Derek before, I recognize that name. Deji's here. And Timothy Galloway. Excellent. Okay. So, since we're on the subject, why don't we? Oh, you said something that I thought was pretty interesting. And I don't know if this is maybe anything that's official industry wise, but when we see credit reports that come in where it's a really thin file, it'll have a score, a Vantage score of 4. Now, I always thought that meant that it was just too thin to be assessed, too thin for a score. Is that essentially what 4 means? As far, or are you aware?
So obviously a 4 can't be a real score, because the score
For sure.
range
Yeah.
is 308. But what you're probably seeing, and FICO does this too, is the credit scoring systems all have what's called minimum scoring criteria. So your credit report has
Hmm.
to meet a certain minimum amount of information in
Yeah.
order for it to qualify for a score. FICO's minimum criteria is different than Vantage Score's minimum criteria. If a credit report fails the minimum criteria, then the scoring system is going to return what's called an exclusion code. And the exclusion code means something. So for FICO, the exclusion codes are in the 9,000. So 9001 means something, 9002
Ah,
means something,
okay.
9003 means something, and it's usually something to the effect of, did not meet minimum scoring criteria due to lack of information, or
Right.
nor scorable trade, or something like that. So that's more than likely going to be an exclusion code than it
Mhm.
is any attempt at a representation of a score. But it's interesting, because Vantage Score has, if you compared the two minimum requirements, the
Mhm.
the Vantage Score bar to hop is lower than the FICO score bar, meaning that more people will have a score with Vantage Score than will
Right.
have a score with FICO, because with FICO it's harder to meet that criteria. So it's
Yeah.
interesting that you are seeing that, because that's almost like the Bigfoot. It's like you hear about
Yeah.
it, but it's really uncommon that people have actually ever seen anything like that.
It happens every now and then. It's when I spent a lot of my time on the phone doing consultations, which I don't do as much anymore. Uh, that was something I would see maybe once a month, and I would probably look at 10, 20 credit reports a day. And it would be very, and of course, everything's Vantage score. So there aren't any 3B subscriptions that are in this space that are FICO. But and we would see on occasion, in the order of TransUnion, because pretty much all of these 3B providers are TransUnion in some sort of TransUnion base. So you'll see TransUnion first, then Experian, then Equifax, and then you'd see, you might get a score in the fours or something like that, and then one of the bureaus would have just a four, not just a single four. And if you looked at the credit report, it might have two accounts, maybe, just maybe they're brand new, and where you might have a score on the other ones, but maybe TransUnion and Experian just had additional info. Maybe it was something a little more aged. So that was one of the things. It's been so long since I've seen that I remember being told that, if you see a four, it means it's just not scoreable.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's going to be a pretty sparsely populated credit report if Vantage scores, if it's failing the Vantage score criteria.
Yeah. They were very, very sparse. Okay, well, first of all, Deji's got a big question. Deji, so just we're always open for questions. It doesn't have to be topic related. If you have something that scores about FICO, Vantage, how to rebuild, anything like that, we always exclude when John is on with me. We don't dive into credit repair specifically. This is more of an educational Facebook Live. So just stick with educational questions, and then we'll address those. So Deji, if you could just maybe scale that down to something a little bit smaller that I can put up on the screen. That would be great. And if we have to break it up into a couple of questions, that's fine too. So, Mike, coming at us with the first question of the day, can you explain a soft pull compared to a hard inquiry, or are they the same?
Yeah, so they're not the same. And so let's talk about inquiries. I actually just wrote a 40-page expert report that dealt with this issue of inquiries. So I've got inquiries on my brain right now. So this is actually a really good time, Mike, to ask that question. There is a requirement in the Fair Credit Reporting Act for the credit reporting agencies to be able to disclose to consumers record of parties that have accessed their credit reports. The method by which the credit bureaus comply with that Fair Credit Reporting Act requirement, when I say requirement, not a choice. They have to do it. Okay, it's not like they're just saying, let's just put inquiries on credit reports. So this is a legal requirement for them to do this. The method by which they memorialize access into your credit report is with what's referred to as an inquiry. So that's a noun, right? A person, place, or a thing. That's the inquiry. The act of pulling someone's credit report is called a credit inquiry. That's the verb. So it's a little bit confusing. People they don't distinguish the act versus the record of the act, but that's what that is. Whenever a company, what's called an end user, whenever an end user applies for service with one of the credit bureaus, yes, you have to apply for service. No lender is conferred the right to pull a credit report by a credit bureau. They have to apply for service and be approved. And most lenders have relationships with all three of the bureaus. But when you apply for service with the credit bureau, if they approve your application, will assign you what's referred to as a subscriber code or a member number. It's the same thing. It's essentially your account number with that particular credit bureau. So if you have a relationship with all three bureaus, you're going to have three different subscriber codes / member numbers, one per bureau, and they're not going to be the same. Okay, so we have to keep in mind that the three bureaus they're ultimately competitors, so they don't share a lot of this information. So that account number that you have with the credit bureau doubles as the information that is included in your inquiry. So if a bank pulls my credit report, John's bank, so let's say John's bank pulls some person's credit report, because the credit bureaus have to memorialize that action, they take it upon themselves to post to the credit report the inquiry of John's bank. And so it's going to indicate the name of my bank and the date of the access. And that's how they comply with being able to disclose to consumers who has had access to their credit report. Beneath that, so now when we start kind of getting into the coding of inquiries, the coding of the inquiry is going to indicate what industry I'm in. So if I'm John's bank, that they're going to code my inquiry as a bank inquiry. They're not going to code it as an insurance company or a collection agency or an auto lender or credit card issuer or mortgage broker. They're going to code it as bank. So what the value of that is that credit scoring systems can see that a bank pulled this person's credit report on some date, and then that's how they determine whether or not to consider it in a credit scoring calculation. All inquiries fall underneath one of two categories: soft inquiry, hard inquiry. Soft inquiries are going to normally, not always, but normally be a record of some company or some party accessing your credit report for something other than in response to an application. So, Mike, if you go pull your credit report, the credit bureaus are going to post a consumer disclosure inquiry. If you have an account with, for example, some bank or some big credit card issuer, and they pull your credit report monthly to do the monthly account management of their accounts, that's going to post as a soft inquiry because you're not actually applying for something with that particular card issuer. Now, if you walked into a car dealership and said, hey, I want to buy that car, let me talk to the finance manager, let's see if I can get me some financing, they're going to pull a credit report. That's going to be a hard inquiry. That's kind of a garden variety. Hard inquiry, normally it's in response to an application, but again, not always, but most of the time it's in response to an application. So from a scoring perspective, everything that falls under the soft category is not only is it not seen by credit scoring systems, but it's also not seen by anybody other than you, the consumer, if you were to get a copy of your own credit report. So if some lender pulls your credit report next week, they can't see that John's bank did a soft inquiry if they did a soft inquiry, or any of the other soft inquiry. You could have 1,000 of them, it doesn't matter. Scoring models don't see it. Other parties don't see it. Now, obviously, if you applied for something legitimately and they pulled a credit report and the credit bureaus posted the hard inquiry, then that inquiry is fair game, meaning that credit scoring systems can consider it, and there's a possibility that it's going to cause your score to be lower, albeit inquiries are almost meaningless. And most of them are not considered, meaning that they don't have any sort of material impact or measurable impact on a credit score, even though some people love to profess that every inquiry lowers your scores, which is simply factually inaccurate. And they do remain on file for 24 months. And as a consumer protection, you have the right to see that. And so if you were to pull your own credit report, you're going to see the list of every party, including you, that has pulled your credit report normally in the last 12 to 24 months, depending on the style of the inquiry.
Excellent. So, Mike, I hope that answers your question. That was a deep dive into inquiries. I don't know that I've heard you go that far into inquiries in probably a couple of years.
Yeah, inquiries are one of those. I think I've been around long enough to be able to say things and not be anecdotal about them. But from my seat, anyways, I think consumers. This is not to Mike. I'm just saying in general. I think consumers ascribe a value to inquiries that they simply don't have. People love to talk about inquiries. People love to write. You're welcome, Mike. People love to write about inquiries. People love to. And David, you and I have been to enough trade shows together, and you've heard me speak, and you hear the type of questions that I get. Yeah. It's inevitable I get questions about inquiries. But I never get questions about the average age or the age metrics of a credit report.
The stuff that really matters, right?
They're worth 150% the value of the inquiry category, but people don't talk about that. It's an easier thing to deal with, but people love to talk about inquiries, which is fine. Look, I'm happy to talk about it. What's important to me is not necessarily what's important to someone else. So I'm happy to discuss it to the extent someone wants to listen about it.
Yeah. That's just if it's real in the consumer's head, then it's something that you have to discuss. But
That's right.
but you're right about a lot of wrong information out there. In fact, I was on a website for was a credit was it no it was a finance company that wanted to partner with us for a white label, and I'm going through because I always like to see what do they do, what are they saying. I don't want to make sure Credit Versio's reputation stays as strong and positive as it is. So I want to make sure they're not doing anything a little shady. And so on one of their sections, they had some information about credit. And then at the very bottom, it said, oh, well, if you have a late payment, it's worth this many points. And if you have a collection, it's worth this many points. And then down below, an inquiry is worth 15 points. I'm like, okay, well, before we go anywhere with this conversation, we need to get on a phone call and see if they're willing to maybe put some factually correct information on their website. But it's supposed to be like maybe a sort of a meet and greet sales call, and it's going to turn into, okay, listen, guys, we got to get something straight on your website that's creating a problem in this industry. But I didn't go there with that conversation, even though I really wanted to.
Look, there's a time and a place for everything.
There's a time and a place. Yeah, no doubt. All right, let's see. Let me scroll up a little bit. We got a couple of questions here. Derek, I received an email from Experian yesterday. My I guess review should be done by April 8th. Oh, okay, I see. So you put some letters out. Okay, great, Derek. Good luck with that. Perfect. Deji is going to break up his question. Jamie, you got a credit repair question. If it's a Facebook question, and it is, I'll swing back and answer it. I won't put it up on the screen. Okay, Deji's got a good question. I think this was part one of his big question that he posed. So what is the best credit card for a new credit user? Should I add her? He's talking about his wife to mine as an authorized user, I'm assuming, before starting the process.
Yeah, so I get this question a lot about what's the best credit card. And so I want to be very transparent about this. I don't research credit cards specifically because I'm not really a credit card analyst. There are people who are, that's what they do. They just sit there and research and compare credit cards. But having said that, except for some kind of details around the edges and the periphery, pretty much all of them are the same, right? I mean, there's really no usability issues any longer. Look, if we would have had this conversation 15 years ago, people would have been like, no one takes Discover. No one takes Discover. Well, I mean, you can't say that anymore, right? I mean, it's almost universal now that every merchant you go to will take a Visa, a MasterCard, an Amex, or a Discover. Yes, you may still find some exceptions. They exist. But by and large, unless you're just a really unlucky shopper, probably everywhere you go, save maybe 1% of the places you go, takes everyone. So from that perspective, the network should not be a problem because it's likely that's not going to be an issue. So usability is not going to be a problem. Number two is what are your interests? Are you more interested in airline miles? Are you more interested in cash back? Are you more interested in points? What is your flavor, right? For me, it used to be before COVID, it was airline miles because I could use them to do, and it was specifically Delta because I live in Atlanta and I always fly out of Atlanta. And so for me, that has a lot of value to me. That has zero value to someone living in Charlotte because they're flying a different airline. They're flying United probably. So it just depends on what do you like to do? If you like to travel, then some rewards card that does hotel points or airline points, or that's your jam. If you don't care, well, you should still get rewards because you're using a card. Get yourself a Discover card and that's like the Gen 1 cash back card. So for me, the benefits that I get with my Amex card are because I get access to the Sky Clubs in the airport. I get upgrades when I travel. I used to spend a lot of time on airplanes. And so this type of thing was really valuable currency to me. Yeah. It's starting to pick back up. So it's starting to be important to me again. But Amex doesn't have a subprime card. So if you've got bad credit, you don't need to apply because you're not going to get approved. You're going to have to go somewhere else. So it really just depends on what you like to do And if you don't really have anything specific that you like to do, get one of any variety of cashback cards. If you've got a kid and you're wanting to build a the college fund, Fidelity has a Visa that you can convert your points into contributions to either your 401k or a 529 college saving. I think 529. I know it's a retirement account or some sort of deferred interest account that people generally will. I have one, and it's pretty bad on me that I don't know if it's my retirement account or a 529. One way or the other, I'm going to get some value out of it. So again, it just depends on what's your flavor. I can tell you this, that if you're looking at credit cards, this drives me crazy. If you look at any of the credit card comparison websites, they usually compare maybe like between a half a dozen and a dozen attributes of the card. And it drives me nuts that every single one of them uses the interest rate or the APR in the comparisons. You know why it drives me nuts? It's because they're all pretty much the same. If you have good credit, you're going to get about 16%. If you got lousy credit, you're going to get about 25 to 29%. They're all the same. And respectfully, if the reason you pick a card is because of its interest rate, then you shouldn't get a card, because you're basically throwing up the white flag and you're saying, well, I'm not going to be able to pay it in full every month. I'm going to charge more than I can afford. And therefore, I'm going to get into credit card debt, which is going to be the most expensive debt that I'm going to service, because I'm not paying 20% on my car loan, and I'm not paying 20% on my mortgage, and I'm not paying 20% on my student loan. But I will happily do it on a credit card just to have a credit card. So if that's what you're using to compare credit cards, then respectfully, I think you probably should get a debit card or something, because you're going to save a boatload of money by doing that. So whenever people ask me about the best credit card, I don't even bring up APR except to be critical of using that as a comparison point. For me, it's all about the rewards. And if you ever look at any kind of like behavior analysis of why people pick the credit cards they use, none of that stuff is important. None of it. It's all about, what's the material of the card made out of? What is the branding and the cosmetic look and feel of the card? Why do you think credit card issuers are now making credit cards out of metal and carbon fiber? It's not because they're easier to use at Target. It's because people are vain and they like to hear, here you go. They like to hear this. This is my Amex. They like to hear this. That's a metal credit card. Does it make this card any better than any other card? No, but it's metal. It's cool. I used to have a credit card. I can't remember who the bank was, but the dang thing was made out of carbon fiber. And I've never had a credit card made out of carbon fiber before, but it was kind of a cool thing to have. I don't have the card anymore. You know what it was? It was a TiVo co-branded card, and I had to get rid of my TiVo. So I got rid of the card because I didn't need it anymore. But yeah, people pick cards for things other than what you would normally think that they would pick them. So pick a card that you like a lot that maybe is made out of a material that's pretty cool. Yeah,
excellent. Yeah, when I first got my my Cap One card, well, it's in my drawer, but this first metal card I've ever gotten, I'm like, wow, this has some weight to it. But one thing that is really a life lesson, John, that was important for me to learn, and it's an important thing for anybody who's going through rebuilding their credit, repairing their credit, starting credit from scratch, especially. And again, you talked about they don't teach this stuff in high school. They don't really teach it in college, and they really should, as far as a basic credit course. And that is that you have to use a credit card for nothing other than mobile, just I forgot the term that you use, but it's for its portability, its ability to just pay for something that you might pay cash for.
Portable capacity.
Portable capacity, for whatever reason, it escaped me. And then paying it off before the end of the statement date. That's the discipline right there. Yep. And that's not something that I learned until I got into my, I think, late 30s. Where I'm like, oh yeah, you know what? This is really a bad idea, having credit card debt. It's the worst kind of debt to have. I think that, so Deji, I think he might have been asking too about adding his wife on as an authorized user. And I see that we have Tina, who's really got almost the same question. And then, so is adding someone as an authorized user good or bad for score increase? And then she follows up with, so we can kind of bundle this all together here because it's really all part of the same question. Also, adding someone as an authorized user, will they have access to any of the information on the card? So
I love that second part of Tina's question.
yeah,
That's a
great question.
That's a really important part. And the important, if I can take Tina's awesome question and expand on it, really what she's asking is there any blowback to the primary card holder? Is there any potential blowback to the primary card holder of adding someone as an authorized user? I'm going to answer the first part now. So I love the authorized user strategy, and I've been very vocal. I don't give opinions very often because I try to stay kind of like Switzerland and just be kind of like the facts and nothing but the facts. But I've always been very vocal that I love the authorized user strategy. It's how my father helped me to establish credit. We've talked about his Sears credit card multiple times on these Facebook Lives, how my dad added me as an auth user on his Sears credit card that was opened like in the dark ages. And that was the first account on my credit report, was my dad's Sears credit card. So I love the auth user strategy. It is decades old. It's not new and fancy. It's decades old. It absolutely will help someone to establish, build, and rebuild. So checks all the boxes. Credit. It is.
Hey, John, are there any scoring models that don't recognize an authorized user?
So no, none of them unilaterally ignore authorized users.
Okay, great.
FICO's more contemporary scoring systems suggest that there's logic built into those models that helps to what's the word I'm looking for? Reduce, or not eliminate, but reduce the impact of trade line renting. Is the the term they use, or I think that most people call it piggybacking, but I think trade line renting is another common phrase. I don't remember their exact language, but that's very different than we ignore authorized users, right? So, but at one point when piggybacking became a thing, FICO did announce that the subsequent version of their scoring model was going to ignore authorized users. And that did not go over well. And they changed their mind, they acquiesced, and instead of just being very nuclear with the approach, they were more strategic. And the strategic approach was that they would attempt to, through modeling and analytics, identify relationships that perhaps were the result of this trade line renting, and then reduce the impact of those off user trade lines. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I've ever run into anybody in the history of my time in this industry that has said, yeah, I'm pretty sure I've got an off user on my credit report that's not being considered because of FICO's logic. I don't think I've ever run into that. So yes, go ahead and use it. Now keep in mind, Tina, this cuts both ways, right? If you are added as an authorized user, then if that credit card is paid late, if that credit card is maxed out, if that credit card goes into default, or if the debt is included in a bankruptcy, that shows up on your credit report too, right? So you want to be sure that the person with whom you're associating knows how to manage credit. And to the extent that they do, then I love the idea. Another great thing about, and I'm going to answer her, I know I'm not answering her question yet, but I am going to answer it. Another thing that I love about the authorized user is you have no liability for the debt. You have full charging permission. So if it's got a $10,000 credit limit, you can go out and spend $10,000, but you have liability to pay back none of that $10,000. So it's what I call a credit card with training wheels, right? If even if the card goes into the fault, even if the balances are really high, you can always hop off the tricycle. You can have your name removed from the account, which is not something you can do if you're a co-obligor or a joint card holder. So the answer to her question was, do they have access to any of the information? The answer is no. You don't. You're not the primary card holder, and therefore you have no permissions on the account. Meaning you can't go changing addresses. You can't go, requesting credit line increases. You're not the primary card holder. Now, if a primary card holder adds you as an authorized user, they don't even have to give you the card, because the card's going to be sent to them, not you. So If they choose to add you as an authorized user, they may not even give you the card, so you may not even be able to buy anything or charge because you don't know what the account number is, and you don't know what the expiration date is, and you don't know what the security code is, and you don't know, you may not know what the billing zip code is, and therefore, if you call a merchant to try to use it, you're not going to be able to use it, and you can't call the card issuer and ask for a physical card to be sent to you because you're not the primary card holder. So it's very unlikely that anything that you do as the authorized user is going to blow back on the primary card holder, except for if you do give them, if the authorized user does get the card, the physical card, they can obviously run up a boatload of debt because they are authorized to do so. So keep that in mind, that most of the relationship is pretty safe, except for when you actually give the card to the authorized user.
Yeah, you don't see that a lot. Did your dad give you a Sears card, or did he just add you on there?
I honestly don't remember. I remember the card. It was like, most credit cards are shaped exactly the same.
It was like a little rectangle.
It was a much thinner or shorter, I guess, card. It was white, and it had the Sears logo on it, and it had a magnet. No, it didn't have a magnetic strip. It just had the numbers.
Because back then it was numbers.
That's right. We had to go.
Yeah, the carbon. Yeah,
that's it. The carbon. You had to push down hard so your signature would get through all 4 copies.
Right.
But no, I don't know that I ever actually had the card.
Yeah, I vaguely remember mine. And right when you said, "Oh, it was a little smaller and narrow," I'm like, I remember my Sears card from like 1989, maybe 1990. I think is when I got my. That was my first credit card, by the way, too. All right, great. Kashif, I love these videos. Keep them coming. Just started round 1 of Credit Versio. Congratulations. That's great. Organic, how do I know my Equifax is okay? So we got to get a complete question from you there, Scott. Hey, Scott Oliver is back. Scott, good to hear from you. And let's see, there's some people just chatting with each other in here. Oh, how funny. Have you and John ever considered having a conference in Vegas so we can come see you in person? Well, as a matter of fact, Mike, John, you're coming to CreditCon, right? Yeah, of course. You're one of the keynote speakers. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So Mike, John, and I both will be at CreditCon, April 9th through 11th. Is that right?
I think that's right. I'll check my calendar.
That sounds right. No. It's
10th through 13th.
10th through 13th. Yeah. Yeah, because we're gonna have a booth there this year, so I remember that because I still gotta do some artwork and everything. Okay. Let's see. Scott, they talking about credit cards. They make them out of metal, like handcuffs.
Hey, so Deji asked a question about the Apple Card. I think maybe he just made a comment, but if I could make a comment, okay. So that's right. So the Apple Card is actually not issued by Apple. Apple is not a bank. It's actually issued by Goldman Sachs. I have been denied for an Apple Card 3 times. 3 times.
You got to explain why, because I think this is a great explanation.
So I have been denied 3 times, and I promise you it doesn't have anything to do with my credit score. So I have fraud alerts on all of my credit reports because I was the victim of credit card fraud a few years ago. So I put fraud alerts on all my credit reports. And so when one of the requirements for lenders is when they pull a credit report, if they see a fraud alert, they have to take reasonable steps to ensure that the person is actually a real person and it's a real application. Mm-hmm. And what they do is obviously they call the number in the fraud alert and they verbally authenticate that you are really applying for something. So I totally expected this to happen. No problem. It's happened many, many times where I've gotten a phone call from someone. They ask you some authentication questions and then they let the application go through. Mm-hmm. So Goldman Sachs is a little bit different. So when you apply for credit, well, at least when I applied my 3 times and was denied 3 times and got denial letters 3 times, which was kind of funny. They called to verify the fraud alert. They called like they were supposed to do, but I didn't receive any of the phone calls live. So they called and left messages each time that they called. And so I called back in response to the messages and it was like, hey, you called, I'm calling you back, to to deal with this whole fraud alert thing. And they're like, no. We have to call you. You can't call us. So I was like, well, then why did you leave a message, or why did you leave a phone number? So anyway, they tried calling me 3 separate times, and all 3 of the times they got my voicemail. And so therefore they denied me 3 separate times. And so I still don't have an Apple Card. I don't think I want one now, because it kind of pisses me off, because none of the other lenders that I've ever dealt with have that crazy policy where they have to be the one that calls you and makes contact versus you calling them and make contact. But whatever, the banks get to come up with their own policy, and that's on them. But good luck, Deji, and hopefully you are able to get a Apple Card. I still do not have one.
I thought I remember this story you told at a summit, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where you were talking about, really what credit card issuers like. There's a sweet spot where I think the language you use is they like people who pay their bills most of the time. But if you are in those, high, low 800s, mid 800s, that sometimes department store cards will deny you.
Yeah, you're less likely to be profitable at that.
Right.
So that's actually kind of an interesting question. Is can you have a credit score that's too high?
Yeah.
We always talk about, is your credit score high enough, or how can I improve a poor credit score? But I rarely get the question hey, is there a downside to having too good of a score?
Yeah.
And the answer is universally, there are some situations, and you can find, blogs about them. People are like, I can't believe I got denied, but, I'm an 842, I'm 8 points off perfect. And here's ultimately these companies are in business to make money, right? Most of them are publicly traded, and revenue is important to them, and it should be, right? I'm in business to make money, and so revenue is important to me. So here's the issue. So let's say hypothetically, I'm going to draw you a scenario where a bank will lose money by approving someone who's got a really good credit score, and they may lose a lot of money, and it doesn't have anything to do with the default.
Right.
So let's say I walk into one of these big box retailers, and I want to buy a canoe, or I want to buy a tent, something that's not $49.99, something that's several hundred, if not more than $1,000. Okay. And I drag my canoe up to the checkout counter. You picture that. And I say, hey, I want to buy this canoe. And they say, okay, Mr. Ulzheimer, would you like to put this on your blah, blah, blah credit card? And I say, well, I don't have a blah, blah, blah credit card. And they say, well, you can save whatever percentage off your purchase if you apply for one. And I'm like, wait a minute. This thing is $1,000. If I can save a few $100s, okay, maybe that's something that's meaningful to me versus, saving $8 on a shirt, where I would never even think about doing something like that.
Right.
And then I say, okay, fine, run my credit. I give you permission to run my credit. That's like an unsophisticated coupon. What you're doing right now is you're trying to use your credit report as a coupon.
And they run I've never heard it said that way. That's great.
They run my credit, and they're like, sorry, bro, you've been denied by the card issuer. Remember, the retailer is not the card issuer. The retailer is the retailer.
Yeah.
They have a relationship with a bank or a card issuer, and the card issuer is ultimately the one who has to make the decision as to whether or not they want to do business with me. And the card issuer may, because of this retailer type of relationship, they may actually, on the revenue curve, they may actually end up below the $0 point on the revenue curve. And here's why. Because it's very, very likely that I'm only going to use this card once to buy this canoe, and I'm going to pay it in full. I just want to save a few $100, so you're not going to make any money on interest, and I'm not going to ever use the card again. I may close it. It's not going to. You don't charge an annual fee. Retail store cards rarely charge annual fees. You're not going to get any fee income. You're not going to get any swipe income. You're not going to get anything. But what did you just pay to acquire me? Well, you just bought a credit report. I know you just bought at least one credit report. That was however many dollars. You sent me a card That's not free. So you had to create the card, you had to mail the card. There's a cost associated with doing that. I take up space in your account management system, and I realize that that's kind of one of these really, I mean, almost ethereal things. That what's the cost of that? Well, we can agree it's greater than 0 cents, right? The fact that I'm taking up space in your system is costing you more than 0 cents. And you're buying your credit report on me monthly because you're doing account management, which is not uncommon. And in order to try to get me to use the card, you're sending me mailers with coupons in them. Hey, here's an incentive. If you use this card at the store, save $200 on purchases greater than whatever. I get those all the time from for Lowe's and Home Depot because I have those cards. I get those all the time from the card issuers because they're trying to give me an incentive to go in there and buy stuff. Well, there's a cost associated with printing that stuff. There's a cost associated with mailing that stuff. So all of these costs are piling up for the card issuer, and they haven't made a penny yet off of me. I'm a customer. I'm in their system, but they haven't made a penny off of me. And the likelihood of them making a penny off of me is much lower because people who have these stratospheric credit scores are smart enough to know that you can't carry balances month to month because A, it's expensive because credit card debt is not cheap. And B, there's a credit scoring issue. People don't end up with 850 because of luck. They end up with 850 because they know what the hell they're doing. So those are the unusual scenarios where you can actually be denied for credit because your credit indicates that you're going to never ever use the card, and therefore you are always going to be below the $0 line on their revenue charts. And therefore it's actually a better business decision for them to deny my application than it is to approve my application. Look, it's a PR loser, right? If I go out there and start tweeting or Instagramming or whatevering, my son can name them all, but if I go up there and start TikToking about how I was denied this credit card with my 850 FICO score, that's not good for PR, right? That's a PR loser to do something like that. So maybe it's just better for them just to approve it and then deal with it accordingly.
Yeah.
But yes, there is no rule. There's nothing in the Fair Credit Reporting Act that suggests or indicates that you have to give somebody credit if they have good enough credit, right? The federal government doesn't set the minimum, except for mortgages, of course. They don't set the minimum standards for credit cards and auto loans and most loans not called home loans, where they do set the minimum standards for if it's a Fannie or Freddie or USDA or VA or FHA loan. But otherwise, it's completely up to the lender to choose if they want to approve someone. And you know what that's called? That's called a high side override. That's what the term is in lending. You have what's called a low side override and a high side override. A low side override is you apply for credit, your credit score falls below their minimum requirement, but you approve them anyways. That's called a low side override. A high side override means that your score eclipses what the minimum standard score is, but you still deny them. Those are low side overrides and high side overrides are pretty uncommon, and regulators don't like those because then you start getting into discrimination issues. Well, wait a minute. Here's this guy that you approved who fell below your minimum requirement, but here's this other person that you denied who also fell below. Why did you approve this one but not that one? Mr. Bank, and I'm a regulator. I want you to explain it to me. And so you've got to really track your overrides, and you better be able to justify why you made that decision.
Interesting.
And which is why overrides are usually something that lenders don't like to talk about.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, where are we on time? I think we got 2 more questions, real quick ones, and then we can wrap it up here. Deji, I think this is just more of an in-house question. I have credit Versio. I'm assuming that's what you meant, Deji. And I have Experian, but it seems credit but updates score daily. Okay, Experian probably updates daily. And do you do it just once a month? Yeah, I think what you're saying is you're getting score updates daily from Experian, but not from Credit Versio. That's because Credit Versio is not a monitoring service. Your monitoring service is a monitoring service. So if whatever you got connected to Credit Versio, I don't know, Identity IQ, Smart Credit, that's going to give you your credit report. Credit Versio is a dispute platform that updates every 40 days. It's not designed to give you your scores on a routine basis. It's not designed for that. Okay. Jamie's got a question right here. We'll finish with Jamie's question. Why would a credit bureau stop listing an open credit card all of a sudden, and how do I get them to start listing it again? So I think that's first part of it. The second part of it still shows on the other 2 credit bureaus. Okay, great question.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take this backwards. I'm gonna answer it in reverse. It's very, very unlikely that once the credit bureaus have decided to not show or not include an item on your credit report, it's very uncommon that they will change their mind and then allow for it to be furnished or accept it again. And so while I don't know why they're doing it, because I don't know what happened in your situation, uh, there are a variety of reasons that can lead to the credit bureaus essentially suppressing any reporting of your account. Number one is you've sued them, and you've sued them for allegedly incorrect information. So they're choosing to not allow it to be displayed. Number two is if you've and I realize who's hosting this Facebook Live, but this is the answer. If you are repeatedly disputing something, the credit bureaus may eventually freeze the reporting of it and not allow it to be. The lender can still attempt to furnish it to all three credit bureaus, but remember, that's only half of the handshake, right? In order to get something on a credit report, two things have to happen. Number one, it has to be furnished. Number two, the credit bureau has to accept it, right? And display it. So half of the handshake is probably still happening, meaning it would be unusual that a card issuer would only report to two when they normally report to three. So they probably still are attempting to furnish it, but it's very likely that whatever the credit bureaus that you're having your issue with has it's called suppression. Some people refer to it as blocking. It's really the same thing. Is that they've masked it. So even though they're accepting the reporting from the furnisher, they're not allowing it to be displayed on a credit report.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah, and Jamie also followed up with what we already know, that the credit card company says they report to all three bureaus.
Yeah.
But John,
so that makes sense.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Great question, Jamie. Hope you got your answer there. John, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm glad it all worked out, especially since you just came off the plane and then the train and then the lift.
That's nuts. It was like, I'm telling you, the stars aligned. This will never.
And apparently got green lights all the way.
Well, I live really close to the train station. So once I got in the lift, I'm like, bro, I'm going to make it. I'm going to make it.
I'm glad you did. All right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And for everybody watching today, thank you so much for joining. Great questions, and we will see you next week. Take care.
All right. Bye, y'all.